I remember pre-first grade, my dad telling me that, and we're related to royalty. I says, oh, cool, I don't have to work. Well, I didn't say it in those words, but whatever I said. And he says, oh, no, Bobby, it's not that way. He says, royalty's #1 job is to make sure all their people live well before they live well.
I don't know what we would have done without the apprentices.
My first apprentice, of course, is my son. And he grew up with it, so he was around.
It was a period in our life where it was really important for us and for them.
But while I was still on Dead Tour, there was this kid that would come and drag my oxygen bottle out and set up my table.
Hugh, on the lot, he was there all the time. He was there every time.
I met Bob on Dead Tour in 1988. I was 17 years old and wanted to get away from where I was in Chicago.
He'd look for us. He'd take the tanks out of the car if we were going to set up outside and blow. Sometimes you couldn't do that at some of the shows.
A lot of it was just to help them because they were really nice people, but also the fact that I was interested in glass pipes.
He'd sit and watch Bob all the time. Just sit there and watch.
He blew his own glass, made his own pipes, and so it was easy for me to actually get something that was affordable and also to be able to hang out with the person who made it.
And we'd get to another show and he'd be there.
He was actually known when I first met him for making borosilicate color.
It was good. It was good to begin to rely on somebody.
There was no real color available, so it really set his stuff apart from a lot of other glass blowers. A lot of glass blowers just use straight clear.
He would mix copper red for me while I had time to go walk around the dead lot and look at everybody's stuff.
He would just take coins or pieces of metal that he would find and kind of cut them up and mix them up and make some stuff out of it.
And then come back and I'd have copper red and maybe silver white.
I just would get him really baked and then go work on the torch. And basically at that time he did not have the tolerance the old man has now, so you could get him to the point where he would not pay attention, and so I'd just go fuck around on the torch.
And then he'd disappear for a little while. He'd say he wasn't going to the next shows or whatever, and then he'd catch up with us.
And after I learned how to blow glass, he realized he could teach other people.
Bob is like I don't know, he's a teacher in a way.
He was the first person to really explain to me why pipes were made the way they were with a pushed-in bowl. He was one of the first people to really have pushed-in bowl pipes.
We went through a lot, trying to make ends meet, trying to look for a place where we wanted to stay.
Hugh was the first guy to get me into Eugene.
It was amazing how many places we lived in that period of time. Oh.
His daughter, actually, Virginia, wanted to go to school from the spring into the fall, and I'd already moved to Eugene, and I told him how nice Eugene was.
You come up there, I'll help you get first and last.
I told him I'd pay for some rent or help him out if he needed to.
Luckily, ran into the place for the winter on our own.
He got a place within 24 hours, so I never had to give him any money for rent or anything like that. It worked out pretty good, because he'd been there a year or two before and met a gentleman that gave him a trailer.
Hugh helped us get our first car, because all we had was a bus and a bread truck.
Getting us here, it was nice. I'm really glad he did.
The bus was still in Colorado, and we had all of our stuff in the bread truck.
And then when we stopped here, it was his influence that other people would come and see what we're doing.
I heard, myths and folklore of Bob Snodgrass, out in Eugene, Oregon.
Someone brought Cameron over. He was actually from Racine, Wisconsin.
And then Cameron popped up.
Cameron Tower came and found Hugh.
A few of my friends had moved out here, and I was got the idea, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to go out and go to the Oregon Country Fair and meet Bob Snodgrass and learn how to blow glass.
And there was a group of people that came out from Racine, Wisconsin. Eugene is a group of people that mostly are not born and raised in Eugene. They come from other places.
He worked with you for a little while.
Their glass, man, Cameron likes little bigger pieces.
It's like this idea, like a dream. That was like my dream. And I made it out here in '92 to the Oregon Country Fair, and I looked all around for him, but I couldn't really, I didn't seem to find him anywhere.
Hugh, his glass is more refined, more smaller hand pieces.
I remember hearing that Cameron built bicycle frames, and so in my mind we're using glass tubes, and we're basically sealing glass tubes to another, and he welded glass or metal frames for a company called Paramount that was the custom division of Schwinn.
I moved out here the next year in the spring of '93.
And I said, well, you know, hey, you're just taking tubes and welding them to each other. You could probably do it, you know, what I'm doing. If you ever have a chance and want to come out and work, I think you'd be good at it.
Met up with Hugh.
Lo and behold, within a short amount of time, he was out there going, okay, now let's do it.
He welcomed me into his studio.
We did it for a while, and we had a place in Glenwood that was not too far from Bob. It was my first shop outside of Bob's shop.
Start learning, and that was the beginning of it all for me. But Bob lived just down the block. Hugh was just down the alley.
Cameron came over, Hugh introduced him, and I invited him over, and come on, and yeah, I'll show you this and that.
When I was kind of out of the picture, he spent a lot more time with Bob because geographically he was very close. And
we had a great time working together, but I wasn't here for long. It was only like 7 months.
Cameron worked at my place, and eventually I moved up to Portland in September of '93, and Cameron took over my shop, basically.
Later that year, we came up with some pretty good innovations.
What took me a year took him about a month to learn, because he didn't have the fear of the flame. He didn't necessarily knew how to work the materials, but he knew how to work around hot things. And that's half the battle when working with the flame, is working around hot things, and then also working with the glass itself.
They liked me and were very sharing, and took me in as family. And
Bob Battram.
Bob Battram was Cameron's next door neighbor.
He would come over and learn some stuff by just watching, and then he hooked up with Bob.
He came along just as a curiosity guy. He wanted to see what was going on.
I worked in Springfield, just across the bridge from here, and lived in Eugene, so I would ride by Glenwood all the time on my bicycle. Stop in the morning, get stoned.
At some point I said, well, you're not going to just stand around here. Make this into a little marble.
That's how it all started. Travis Wigger would stand up when he would take a break. I'd sit down in his spot and make marbles for Bob and Cameron.
Well, Travis squeezed in there somewhere.
Travis likes things that are bigger. He can make beautiful glass. He can do fine things. He's got little styles of his own.
I came in the shop one day and he shows me this wrecked piece of glass and said, I made a pipe. I don't need another pipe maker, I need a marble maker.
I mastered the flower marble, and they liked that enough to adopt me as an apprentice.
You don't touch making pipes, you make marbles. And he made these awesome marbles.
I was into the perspective drawings with the horizon and the vanishing points.
He's an economist. He always tries to do things the easiest and less effort way.
And I was already trying to draw stuff because Bob would be pointing out pictures that he didn't necessarily draw, but he would find.
Always been an inventive kind of character.
He does abstract stuff, and it's like looking into the clouds, and you would find pictures and point them out.
He ran. He ran with it good.
So I started drawing stuff on the, on tubing, and
Presto. Brain's on fire, can't stop.
I just try to perfect drawings of different scenes and figuring out what different scenes I could use and that would be attractive.
He really succeeds in producing phenomenal looking pieces
The best one that I can do and still do is Jerry Garcia.
with an economic approach to wasting energy and not wasting energy.
You gotta love him for that. He's a very popular character. And maybe I should start drawing Bob.
Bob Batram's still, you know, doing incredible work.
It's all blur. It's all blending together now. It's hard to explain. But for years, it was just, there's like 5 or 6 of us, like making glass as fast as we could.
So he came along, and then let's see.
Like Brian came up from Texas.
Brian Padilla shows up.
Was it your brother was next?
The Grateful Dead was a huge part of me even getting to Eugene.
Brian and Yvonne, wow, they're good.
I had known Jason Harris for a short time, and I asked him if he would teach me to blow glass because I really wanted to blow glass.
You can tell who the open spirits are by just watching them work.
Jason Harris gave me Bob's address, and so like he didn't even give me his number, I don't think. So I had to drive by Bob's house in Glenwood.
Hours and hours I see him work on one piece.
I think I saw Kelly Chastain, and I was like, "Are you Bob?" And he's like, he kind of laughed at me, I think, and he's like, "No, I'll go get him for you."
You can't say enough about, you know, Brian's, you know, and the people that he's taught. You know, it's just a very high level of excellence.
But that's the first time I met Bob, and I just introduced myself and told him I was interested in blowing glass, and that I was wondering if he would teach me.
Well, I kind of started doing inside out after seeing Brian Padilla doing some inside out work.
I was like super obsessed with inside out glass, and there wasn't a whole lot.
There came a time when everything had to be like, oh, it has to be inside out, or inside out this and that, or it got really difficult.
I think one I'm probably known for is the flare inside out technique, where you flare a piece of tubing open and draw on the inside and then close it back down.
Inside out work and the fold over technique, you know, which was something Bob did.
Because I think Bob would do some disc flips maybe.
You know, he just learned from Bob. Like, so that's great to see. Like, he's like an extension.
He was going off of what Bob would do. Bob would draw on the outside, but within his mind, he's thinking he's going to flip it over and use the other side. And he called that inside out.
I feel like I kind of like developed the first inside out line work tubing, like a tube pull, using his cut and flip technique. I'm not really sure if he would cut and completely like flip it around on itself.
Brian Padilla took it and ran with it, and, you know, younger people with a fresh, you know, start can take these like techniques that Bob's figured out over decades and just run with it and do it better and do it, you know, like it's amazing to see that.
After I got into soft glass, I saw them doing roll-ups and using tweezers and stuff to like reconnect the pieces. So it gave me the idea to do a full cut with some line work and roll it back up and connect it back and make it a tube again and do a tube pull.
What Brian was doing is like, well, he wanted to remove that step of flipping it around and having, you know, this, revealing the seal marks.
He'd flare like two pieces of tubing out and fume on both of them and attach them together. So that's kind of how I got the idea to just fume on the inside and start drawing on the inside, because when I'd see him do it, he would get this overlap on it.
I came up with the idea of flaring out a tube and drawing the horizon and some of the background on the inside, and then drawing pictures on the outside, so it'd give it a depth.
And then let's see.
More people started coming up from Texas.
Benny's good.
Benny was there, Steve Stotts.
He doesn't work as much,
So I think it was Benny.
but he's good.
He came in from Texas.
He can put glass together real well.
And then Steve Stotts,
He had good ideas.
they knew each other before they came here.
In 1991, I moved out to Eugene, Oregon from Emerald, Texas, and I stayed out for like 3 months. Moved back, told my friend Brian Padilla about Eugene, Oregon.
I was a close friend of Brian Padilla's.
I sold him a Volkswagen van.
I drove my bus to Eugene.
We were friends before he started blowing glass.
They went on Grateful Dead tour.
The Grateful Dead changed my life for sure.
They ran into Bob.
He met Bob at the Autzen Dead shows.
And I wouldn't have been in Eugene if it wasn't for the Grateful Dead.
Bob settled down here in Eugene.
And we also went to the Rainbow Gathering.
Brian settled down here in Eugene.
Everybody was talking about Eugene on tour.
And he learned to blow glass from Bob.
Watched Brian for a while he was learning.
How good the weed was there and how fucking cool of a place it was.
I always admired his style.
Came back to Amarillo, Texas. Showed me the glass he was making, and I decided that's what I wanted to do.
His pattern work was, still is pretty flawless.
That was the destination after that.
Pretty much admired that about him.
Dad moved on July 19th, 1995.
Eventually asked Bob if I could start an apprenticeship.
Made it here by the 21st.
At the end of '95 is when I pretty much started.
Started a 2-year apprenticeship.
And then, let's see,
Yvonne and
Brian?
Yvonne showed up.
Brian and Yvonne.
They're both really talented.
And Brian told his sister about it. And
Just pioneers of silver and gold patterning.
She came in a little later.
My brother moved to Eugene.
I have a hard time talking about my sister.
Yvonne came up with the dot box.
Her dots are unique.
And he would call me every so often.
Late autumn, early fall, I think, of 1995.
Her color patterns are really outstanding.
I just knew she was in a spot where she could be doing better.
And be like, you need to move to Eugene to blow glass, to learn to blow glass.
I just wanted her to thrive and be happy,
He called again.
The dot boxes and stuff no one was really doing that at the time.
And it wasn't like now where you call everybody or you can text everybody. It was like you really had to make a call and ask somebody.
They just stepped in and they kind of,
Put my stuff in storage.
Some of her stuff, in some ways, I think
I packed up my car.
surpasses Brian's maybe a little bit.
My brother said you're going to make marbles.
they're both so talented that they just kind of, I don't want to say pushed each other, but inspired one another.
With no money.
Don't tell him I told you.
And drove to Eugene.
Brian still does some patterns that he's learned from his sister.
I got here not really knowing what to expect or what was going to happen.
You just have to look at their work and you can see.
But that's when I took on blowing glass here with the Snodgrass family.
So let's see, I got up to Yvonne and then...
A friend of mine lived up the street from me, and he came out here to Eugene in '93 for the Grateful Dead.
Stan show up.
And actually met Bob over at his house over there and got a chillum from him.
Stan was like 15 when he first came around.
And he took that back to Baltimore after a summer tour.
I didn't know he was that young. I thought he was driving.
And we were like, what the heck is this thing, man? All we were smoking out of was metal and plastic, We'd never seen glass before, and he's like, it's a snotty.
He like, at 14, pretty much moved out on his own and
told us the story about sidecars and bubblers, and he's like, this is all I could afford. It was $75.
Stan came around and came around and came around.
I was like, man, that sounds really cool. I always wanted to come out here and check it out after that, and glad I did.
Finally, we let him work.
I ran away from home when I was 15 to go on tour with the Grateful Dead and followed Jerry Garcia around. And
he came along late after Cameron and a couple others, 4 others, 5 others.
That ended when Jerry died, and my parents were like, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? You dropped out of high school to go on tour. And I said, man, I'm moving to Eugene to learn how to blow glass with this guy, Bob Snodgrass.
And I'd put him with each different glass blower at some point in the game.
And they were like, okay, at least you're learning a trade. So they supported me through that, and that was really cool.
And have him watch them. And Stan ended up being able to imitate everybody.
I was living in the shop where I was working previous to my apprenticeship with Bob.
And his style is actually a collage of from Bob Battram to Cameron.
I smelled some strong aroma of marijuana.
He can make things that look like they came from me.
A certain kind called Trinity. it actually smelled like a skunk.
And there's little variables of how close or far from the flame everybody works, and all of that kind of leaves a fingerprint.
It was a popular strain in Eugene at that time, one of the higher end strains.
Trinity's the best weed that I've ever smoked, pretty much, I think. I mean, maybe now it's like a lot of stuff's comparable.
It had a particular smell to it. It traveled like 100 feet.
Oh man, it was the strongest smelling weed I've ever smelled, even to this day.
I smelled that, and my nose is pretty strong. I'm walking around the corner, and then I see this bus that we're sitting in right now, and I knew this bus. It's hard to mistake.
That shit would stink up like anything. Yeah, it was crazy.
All of a sudden, I hear Bob, and there's like 15 guys in there blowing glass.
Something about that strain was really magical, for sure.
Snotty shop is right around the corner from our shop, and I was like, this is sick, man. He's right here.
Finding the Trinity weed it led me to Bob in a weird way. It's like a crazy story, but it's just weird how connected things are.
So I saw Bob, and I'm like, you want to smoke a bowl, Bob? It smells like you're burning something pretty good over here. And
Starting to get up to like 10 apprentices going on.
But yeah, that's how I met him.
Battram says, you got to get a bigger place.
He said, oh, I'm looking for some new apprentices. Would you like to? And I was like, hell yeah, man. Where do I sign up? How do I do this?
We had, at one time, 15 or 14 or 15 people.
Had the bus, and it had 3 stations.
We had Bob Battram.
And then we put 4 torches in there.
Bob Third.
Didn't have this yet.
Cameron.
There had a miner at one end.
Yvonne and Brian.
2 national torches.
Travis Wigger.
And 1 Carlisle.
Steve Stotts.
Just wonder we're not all deaf.
Ben Manise.
Torches hissing.
If I left anybody out, I'm sorry.
Bob got a bigger shop.
And that's about when we went to Goshen, isn't it?
Bob and my brother and then 11 other guys.
Moved the shop from Glenwood out to Goshen.
Those days are a little foggy for me.
Pulled all the apprentices out there.
5 miles south of Eugene.
We used to make a lot of pot food with a strain called Trinity.
From his shop on 16th Street.
Which became like a little miniature mecca of glass blowing.
They set up more benches and torches.
I can't really remember those days very well, unfortunately.
Bought this fan that's on this bus.
16 by 8 bench where we're all facing each other.
3,200 square foot.
Big hood over the top of it.
Warehouse building.
Dave Willis had a shop down on the end of the building. And
Bob set up at the front.
I was pretty much living in Goshen.
Can't even imagine what years those were.
In a U shape.
95.
That was crazy.
96.
They'd all look at what each other was doing.
We all kind of taught each other.
It was them being together.
That was like the explosion period there.
And they'd pick up each other's styles.
We were all working in this one shop.
Whoever sat next to each other, they started picking up each other's styles.
Even like the new people had more teachers to learn from.
It was good. They helped each other. They taught each other. Because that's the way it was meant to be. I think Bob was meant to bring them together. There was something that said in his brain that said, this is the way it's supposed to be. And it worked well.
There was I was saying, that friendly competition to try to outdo the other guy.
When you have a lot of energies together in one place, it makes it a little bit of a challenge.
Artists push each other by achieving greatness. That pushes the next guy to to do better, to be on that same level. You want to be recognized as on the higher level.
Everyone at one point split shops up, and I feel like it was based on the music that you liked.
3 different shops going in the area.
People were into Grateful Dead.
Battram and Travis got their own shop.
It was my brother and Cameron and I. And then Stan. I think Stan was in that shop with us for a little while.
We made some great stuff there. It was kind of a short-lived period, but we had some good times.
I really liked world music and rap.
So we all had our own shops at that point, but in the same compound over in Goshen.
So that was kind of interesting. Was maybe like a social experiment.
Before we kind of branched out from our own Snodgrass glass to like Cameron had his own shop, and Brian and Vaughn moved out, and I moved in with Travis, and I blew glass with Travis.
Bob moved his shop to here, where he bought this house and set up the trailer, set up the van, or the bus, and had more apprentices. You know, had more room for more apprentices, and there's a few of them, and they just went all kinds of different directions from there.
I moved up to Seattle and got a job in '98, and kind of, you know, drifted into the woodwork for a while.
Bob's apprentices, each one of them needed something. They needed to have that environment that was close, family. I'll help you, you help me. And they needed people to listen to them. Sometimes they were young. They didn't believe that their family was trying to help them also. So they'd leave. They were out looking for something. Sometimes they found it and sometimes they didn't. But most of the time, that's what they needed. They needed something. They were going to have a hard time otherwise. And we were just a little bit older. We had seen just a little bit more. And they needed that help. They needed that love that sometimes they wouldn't get somewhere else. Some people had a hard time. Some people never got it. Most people did.